Hey guys, giveaway still going on, going until 150,000 subscribers. Go down below, check it out, and make sure you get yourself involved. I'm giving away 2 Venators. Enjoy the video. Hello.
Our story begins on Mortis, of all places, with 3 individuals brought down at 3 separate times. Anakin in the middle. In the darkness was Darth Sidious, and in the light was Yoda. None of them knew where they were, and none of them knew the other was here. They all were simply gathered for the purpose known only to one. The son and daughter did not know that they were brought here, but they felt the presence of light and dark upon their arrival. Anakin, in the middle, was near a lake. He had been sleeping in a bunker in the front lines. He woke up because the sound of blaster fire had stopped. His eyes were heavy, and the first thing he did was search for a student. Ahsoka was nowhere to be seen. Not to mention, come to think of it, the clones were pretty absent too. Anakin turned around, looking all around himself, before stepping up to the lake he was lying next to him. Distracted by his own charming looks, he grinned before testing the water to see if it was clean. It was, meaning that he could have a refreshing face wash and a quick sip before truly understanding what was going awry here. Skywalker looked over to the cliffside and stepped towards it to investigate how he ended up here. Without a starship to guide him to a landing position, he was completely separated from anything. No speeder, no travel, no nothing. His legs would be forced to carry him. But he could see a beacon in the sky, one where a citadel sat ominously alone. Skywalker would go investigate this. Out in the light, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order didn't move. He wasn't even aware that he hadn't left the temple, until a slight breeze moved the little hair on his head to the left. Yoda's heavy and somehow even weak eyes opened. He regained a sense of consciousness, and recognized that this was not his home. He had left the temple. Being that he hadn't heard the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn or interacted with the Force priestesses yet, this was a bizarre occurrence. Yoda pressed his hands to his knees and stood up shakily. Getting old really takes it out of you, and the Jedi Master found his footing after letting his body follow suit with waking up. He pulled his cane to his hand with the Force and stepped aimlessly around. At his small height, he would have to ascend a tree or a hill to see anything, but unlike Skywalker, he gained a quick understanding of the Force swelling around him. It was so dense and fulfilling. Yoda felt joy over the Force and how powerfully attuned to it this planet was. But despite these joyful feelings, the Jedi Master noted something was off. It was like a trick. Perhaps that was what he was sensing. Yoda eventually found something to ascend, and when he reached the tip top of it, he too could see the citadel. But he could sense someone or something nearby. It wasn't a threat, just another life moving about within the cosmic force. Though Yoda understood immediately that this planet would challenge everything he knew about himself and the Force. The Jedi had their own dogma about it, and their understanding of it, but this planet fundamentally would challenge that. Yoda leapt from the tree and landed softly, so he could begin his trek. The daughter, nearby, meditating as Yoda had been before he was taken from his chambers, sensed him. She quickly moved to her feet and walked around her forest to investigate this new visitor. The father did not make the entrance of these 3 visitors known to his children. He was simply curious to see if they could unite the Force, because something worse was coming. The daughter, unlike her lovely brother, wouldn't interact with Yoda, just observe the elderly green lifeforms. Sidious and the son, on the other hand, were not waiting around. The Dark Lord of the Sith swung his lightsabers at the sun, but he was just playing with his food. He avoided the rapid strikes from the Sith Lord. Palpatine used the Force to create craters in the world that the sun called his home. Trees and debris went flying past each combatant, as Sidious leapt at him with viciousness, attempting to kill the impossibly difficult foe. Despite this not going in his favor, Palpatine enjoyed the challenge. He giggled to himself as he rolled around his opponent. His weapons continued cutting up the dirt beneath him, and he remained unable to land a hit on his opponent. Sidious realized, in this moment, that it'd be a contest of the Force. He threw his hands forward with all of his strength, catching the unsuspecting son off guard. He fell backwards and rolled across the ground, before slicing through a tree with his body. Sidious grinned, putting his 2 sabers on his belt. Unlike the other 2, Palpatine was in the middle of researching a new alchemy technique from Plagueis' journals, and he was very grumpy because he wasn't able to finish that. The sun rose from the crashed site and threw himself at Sidious. The Dark Lord sent electricity at the being, hoping to kill him in the attack, but nothing would be changed. The sun pushed his non-dominant hand outward and caught the blue electricity and laughed at Palpatine, calling him a feeble old man. the Sith Lord got angrier and tried to overpower the literal being of darkness. Sidious may have surprised his son once, but that would never happen again. Never would he do this to him again. The sun raged, firing red electricity from his hand and burning Sidious. Instead of breaking his foe, it only made him stronger. Palpatine yelled in agony as he fired more of his own electricity at the sun. Red and blue meshed, creating a storm of electricity that blasted up into the sky, creating a flash of light and sound that encompassed the entire world of Mortis. The father watched in disappointment. As the light died out in the dark side of the planet, the Dark Lord of the Sith collapsed to his knees and looked up at the sun, who gripped him by the throat, asking what he was. The sun laughed, telling the puny little Sith that he was the agent of darkness, the truest form of something he could only aspire to become. He backhanded Palpatine and knocked him unconscious, before dragging the Sith Lord by his hood across the ground, so that he could see the father inside of his citadel. The first of the three to arrive at the tower would be Skywalker. He had no distractions, and he had the easiest path to do it. When he entered, he found the father, still seated on a meditation pad. He didn't say anything to Skywalker when he walked through the door. Anakin pulled his lightsaber and pointed it at the ethereal being. The father's eyes found the saber, and with a simple and gentle push of his hand, the weapon hid itself within the hilt. Anakin looked perplexed as he watched the ghostly man rise from the floor with a glide. He towered over Anakin and told him to walk. Without a choice to do anything else, he followed suit. They sauntered lightly over to the edge of the catwalk to a lookout. When they stepped to it, they could see the divide between the son's home and the daughter's. They didn't say anything, and the father simply clasped his hands together and sighed. His eyes found their way to the sky, but Anakin didn't notice. He just saw that someone very tiny was walking here, from the front of the pathway. It seemed to be Master Yoda, but how could that be? Skywalker turned to the father and asked him where he was, to which the father told him that there was a great disturbance in the Force. The cosmic realm had been upset, and it was time for the fighting to cease. There were larger threats in the galaxy than the Jedi and the Sith believed there were. Their opposition towards each other would disperse the galaxy into a chaotic state that would take a millennium to heal. The father issued a warning, suggesting that Skywalker take everything that followed their interaction with complete understanding and seriousness. If he didn't, then the galaxy and the people of it would pay drastically. This was a very ominous tone, and Anakin searched for another answer, but a pair of individuals appeared from the broken forest, one wearing a hood, and the other with Pa'un-looking markings. The sun from a distance could very easily be mistaken for a local from Utapau. They waited, without saying much, until Yoda truly became visible. At that moment, Anakin rushed away from the father to greet him. At the bottom of the steps, Chosen One and Grand Master would reunite. They would speak to each other about what they had seen on the planet and their theories, including Anakin's own interaction with the father. Without even hesitating, he asked if Yoda would like a ride to the top of the steps. The Jedi Master, despite being winded, didn't want to take the offer, but he reluctantly accepted after Anakin pointed out the tiredness that Yoda carried. It helped him significantly to catch a ride. Walking the distance he had at his size was especially difficult. Yoda and Anakin couldn't find the father, though. Instead of searching, Yoda was let down so he could try and read through some hieroglyphics. He examined the graphics on the wall and tried to understand them, until an angelic voice cut through the air, telling them that they were the tales of the prophecy, or more or less, what the father believed it to be, when he first breathed life into the Mortis realm. He inscribed them himself. Yoda and Anakin turned back to see the voice that spoke these words. The creature passed between pillars, while keeping her eyes on each of them. Anakin put his hand on his saber, but Yoda raised his hand, suggesting that they stand down. Yoda knew that she'd been following him for some time, and he informed Anakin that she had her eyes on him throughout his journey to the Citadel. If she was a threat, he would know. They were walking together, but Yoda stepped towards her, asking for a name. The daughter gave the name, which forced Anakin to think about the father-like individual he met. There was no name given by him, but Anakin believed that that man was some sort of guardian of this planet. So, if her name was a daughter, who was the old man? The woman walked towards him lightly and expressed that he was the father. She assumed, correctly, that they'd been brought here to explore the nature of the forbidden. Yoda and Anakin looked to each other before watching the daughter point towards the hieroglyphics and acknowledge some of the prophecy's fulfillment thus far. She said that there were some hiccups. Her father's meditations were not always precise. but many of their predictions were correct. She pointed at some cataclysmic dark ages throughout galactic history. 25,000 years of Jedi history had seen many falls and rises. With those came the extinction of other Force groups that once aligned themselves with the Jedi Order. Many of them had likely been forgotten by the Order by this point. She then addressed the false senses that weren't on track to ever happen, but then pivoted to the belief that the Sith would create Skywalker or a Chosen One by accident. This didn't make Anakin or Yoda feel any better. If he was created by a Sith by accident, that was a problem. They blankly stared at her, and just tried to process what that meant, as she continued forward as if it wasn't a big deal. She explained how her father foresaw the destruction of the Sith at a great desert battle, but unfortunately that never came. Among the flawed visions and those that were correct, there was one that required them all. A sinister being was returning, and instead of finding home on Mortis, she'd find her way to the galaxy itself. She was once a member of their own, here on Mortis, but she became too powerful and too power-hungry. Unfortunately, Father believes that the son would take her side and attempt to overthrow her. The daughter admitted sadly that she believed her father was growing weaker, hence his sudden interest in including more fleshy beings, rather than the ones themselves. His fears, if they came true, would see the collapse of everything, with a new power ruling over the galaxy. The word "enough" echoed out from above them, and the father returned to the floor where she stood, informing the daughter that knowing too much could disrupt their effectiveness. He regretfully apologized and told them that what they needed was to be combined. Yoda and Anakin again looked to each other, before a third figure was dragged into the room and tossed to the floor. Palpatine's face was exposed, and he woke up in a daze. His Sith robes identified him as their enemy, not their friend, something the two Jedi identified nearly immediately. They drew their lightsabers, and Yoda positioned himself in front of Anakin. The son encouraged the slaughter, but the father did not, using the Force to take all of their weapons, as he explained to them that their differences had divided the galaxy, making it weak. The Force was weak. What they didn't know is that by the cosmic shift in the Force, they had weakened a barrier protecting the galaxy from an ancient force. Sidious smiled, looking to the two Jedi, then to the ones, informing the father that he would defeat it or use it for his own gains. The son giggled quietly, and the father, amused in Palpatine's arrogance, commented on his loss to the son. If he couldn't beat a mere child in darkness, then he would never stand a chance against his truest avatar. Palpatine wished to stand against his point, but he was silenced with the wave of the father's hand. He told them that here, they needed to get along, so that when they returned back to their own realm, they could use each other's strength against the mother. He created a smoke-covered orb with his left hand, and tapped his right pointer finger against it, revealing something unleashed. While Abaloth couldn't yet escape, her creation, imbued with all of her powers, would wreak havoc on the galaxy. The wave of his hand again showed the individual wearing light armor and even lighter robes, and working through Jedi and Sith alike without any struggles. Sabers clashed, Jedi fell, and then he fast-forwarded to the future, showing Dooku's near-instant defeat to the creature. They called it the Bastard Child. Sidious wasn't concerned with Dooku's destruction, but he was slightly worried about the vast skill this individual held. As explained by the father, this was a powerful creature designed to rupture the status quo of the war. Once his job was finished, the galaxy would see Abaloth in her truest form. In other words, he was created to break her out, and then killing him so she could once again hold all of her power. No one truly understood what was being said, so it was explained for the class. The mother was once one of them. Not quite though. In her efforts to retain immortality so that she could be with her family, she pulled power from two pure sources. In this, she fractured herself, and in the combined power of the ones they banished her, though this was apparently not the end of her story. What the ones failed to realize is that with every era of perpetual darkness, the barriers restraining her from the galaxy weakened, allowing her to access more of her powers. What they called the Bastard was truly that, a child created with every single power held by the ones and the mother, so that it could destroy. This child did not have morality nor consciousness. He would not be reasoned with, because he was a pawn, one created to destroy. His sole purpose was to finish what the Clone Wars started, and by freeing Abaloth, his life would be consumed, and his power given to its giver. He was alone. The bastard had a short time to live and enjoy life, and once his purpose was fulfilled, he would be executed, lovingly, by the mother who used him for her own gains. What the father and daughter failed to realize is that no one among them took this threat too seriously. Yoda was mildly concerned, Anakin didn't really care, and Sidious still believed there was a path to stealing this power for himself. So instead of letting him free, he'd give him a false sense of freedom. The father, whipping together the last piece of his strength, cemented his children into stationary objects, turning them from life to stone, and then planted Skywalker, Yoda, and Palpatine back into their own lives, as if they had left Mortis. This was another alternate timeline, one that simply didn't exist, and as if time was slipping by, they watched the galaxy implode on itself. The child broke down clones, battle droids, battleships, citizens, Jedi, and Sith alike. There was no remorse for any soul that crossed it. When Palpatine tried to arrogantly cross the line, he would be captured by the child, so that his powers could be drained for the child's own growth and strength, essentially using Palpatine as a portable energy booster, someone with enough life essence to feed the child whenever he needed it. Yoda and Anakin in this scenario continued to try and find ways to stop it. In the evacuation of their order from the core, they would be traced and slaughtered. Of course, because this wasn't real, something continued to bother Anakin. It was a stationary object that just didn't look right. He never figured it out until it was too late. In this red lamp, Anakin was able to learn that everything was a fabrication, and before Palpatine and Yoda exited their traumatic experience with the child, Anakin returned to Mortis, where they never had actually left. The father imposed a sense of prison or purgatory onto the three of them, hoping that by breaking their spirits they could find unity together. They didn't find said unity in their own universe. The funny thing is, because of how jarring the alternative reality is, it felt like years of their lives were fully lived. They experienced everything, as if it happened by the millisecond, making only a few short moments inside of the Mortis realm feel like years of lived life. But Yoda and Anakin, despite seeing Palpatine on Mortis, never tried to confront him in this alternate reality, because they didn't have control over their lives. Everything was a simple fabrication that they could not control. Skywalker pressed the father for answers, but he only became weaker the further this went on, no matter how short of time he was actually using his power. It was such an extraordinary show of strength and mastery of the Force that he collapsed and looked to Anakin and grabbed him by the shoulder, telling him to unite themselves. Their age, skill, and combined power in the Force could stop the child and kill her. The father released his grip. The son and the daughter were flung from their stone forms into life. They landed on opposite sides of the room, and the father told Skywalker to trust himself. Yoda and Palpatine awoke at the same time, as the father's eyes laid shut, and he fell lifeless into the ground. Both of his children rose and rushed Anakin, believing that he had done this. Almost in a reaction of fear, from both instructors of Skywalker, Palpatine and Yoda called out his name. He didn't even look up. He remained sturdy and lowered the father to the ground, before reaching out to both sides with his arms, capturing the light in the dark, only to control them and press each of them to the ground, forcing them to bow before him. This wasn't even out of control, but simply to protect himself. Sidious grinned deviously, seeing that the true path to victory was through obtaining control over Skywalker. With this, he could stop the child, destroy Abaloth, the Jedi, and have control over the galaxy. He saw the benefits of an alliance here, but Skywalker needed to be manipulated. He pressed the children to the ground and told them to yield, which both did almost immediately. Anakin pulled back, allowing them to grieve their father. But the darkness is a curse. The son, with intentions to rule this realm, rushed his sister, trying to force her away from their lifeless father. Anakin ripped the son away with a vicious tug in the Force, one separating the son's arm from his entire body due to the intensity of which he was pulled at. The son wheezed in pain as Skywalker pointed at him, showing fully the power of the dark side as he yelled at the son, telling him that that was enough. If he acted up once more, he would give him the least satisfying death experience felt in galactic history. Yoda tried to stop Anakin, and Palpatine tried to encourage, but nothing was getting through his head. The vast power of the Mortis realm gave Anakin the chance to raise himself to a strength he had never felt before, but he quelled himself, asking the son if he was alright, to which he hissed and rushed away from the citadel. Anakin turned to the daughter and asked if she was alright. She nodded, but she told them that they all needed to go. The Mortis realm would survive. She would bury her father. Anakin, Palpatine, and Yoda needed to return to their galaxy. The child would strike again soon. At this, each of them realized that the first showing of slaughtered Jedi was not just a fabrication, it was reality. Palpatine and Yoda specifically were still reeling from their several-year hiatus, which was again only a few seconds in the Mortis realm. But they collectively understood that the child was a threat, and Palpatine remembered the years of torment he suffered under the child's abuse, and he understood the gravity of the situation. If he could not be controlled or stopped, then they would all suffer. Yet despite having a clear grasp on the severity of their threat, Palpatine couldn't help but see the promise of Anakin's power. He wanted to control it and manipulate it. Anakin hadn't acted out towards Palpatine for apparently being a Sith. Sidious hadn't truly considered how jarring Mortis was for Anakin, which is why he didn't care too much about this revelation, though it would hit him when they all returned to the galaxy that his friend Palpatine was a Sith. By a sweep of the Force instigated by the daughter, they would all return. She would prepare to arm herself as well, knowing that her brother would attempt to kill her. The fate of Mortis would be decided by the actions of those living in the galaxy. Palpatine, ironically, held the balance of the Force within his hands. Upon the return, Yoda and Anakin got into contact with each other immediately. Skywalker was again at the battlefront, and Yoda inside the temple, but they would determine a meetup location after Yoda consulted the Council on 8 missing Jedi from the forests of Kofar, a mirror to a distant memory of lost time. When they reunited, only when they saw each other face to face for the first time did either Yoda or Anakin realize that the Dark Lord of the Sith was Chancellor Palpatine. The Grand Master made a point to avoid communication on this topic with other members of the High Council. He knew, based on the Father's word, that only they, 3, could destroy the child. Yoda wished that the Night Sisters had survived, so that he could attempt to bring Mother Talzin with them. Due to this happening later in the war, there was no original Mortis cycle with Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin. The Father believed that they were too weak to be present, understanding the importance of saving his power, that the avatars of light and dark, with that of the Chosen One. The Father's life now belonged in the hands of Anakin. Could he unify 2 religions with a rivalry dating back thousands of years? Yoda and Anakin quickly thought through some attempts, as they walked through the restricted section of the archives. It also was not lost on Yoda that Anakin courageously accepted this challenge at such a young age. Quickly, they stopped at a section, and Yoda quickly started pulling information from it. Sidious, on the other side of the city, waited for the Jedi to make a move. It had been nearly a full day since they had returned to their bodies, and nothing happened. No attempt to capture him was made, and he was a little annoyed. Actually, he was genuinely perturbed. He thought he meant something to the Jedi. The fact that they acted like he was a second-tier villain upset him greatly. He wanted to feel like a threat, and he wasn't even treated like a minor inconvenience. He believed wholeheartedly that the Order would make a move within 24 hours, but they didn't. Despite this frustration, he was consulting his alchemy once again. He no longer was looking through Plagueis' teachings. He was searching for something greater, how to stop a threat of this size. He knew what the Father said, but he couldn't just trust the Jedi or some superficial being that died by using the Force once in front of them. Obviously, he was ignoring the insane age of the Father and the vision he had. Palpatine, instead of trying to find the child, searched for paths to defeating it. Yet there was nothing in his collection or Plagueis' that told him how to defeat a galactic threat Darksider. This was something he truly hadn't encountered before. So what was he to do? Well, the answer was simple, but he wouldn't side with the Jedi. That would destroy his image in the Sith history. Even if it was so that their history could continue, it would destroy it. Sidious wouldn't do that to his own legacy. Across the city, Yoda and Anakin continued working through short little lessons, realizing that they would likely be in this alone. While the Jedi didn't make a move on the Chancellor, the Council was told to keep tabs on him, since he was unseen for the entirety of the last day and a half. Yoda and Anakin knew they were alone in this, but they could do something else to try and stay ahead of the curve. Yoda pulled a holocron and opened it, referring to a list of known planets with vergences in the Force. Anakin looked at it, and before he could ask, Yoda affirmed that Anakin too was a vergence. If they wanted to defeat a power, they needed to summon the Force in its purest form. This came from Anakin and from a planet he could take from. Anakin looked at the planets and named them quietly to himself, as Yoda told him to pick based on his heart, and they would go there to stop the child. As he looked through them, Yoda prepared to speak, but he held his tongue. The Chosen One placed his hand on a name, and a chill shot down Yoda's back. It was called Aratera, a location of a light side versions, but it was also home of thousands of years of conflict. The Jedi and Sith both sought control over the Virgins, but never truly held it. However, Yoda knew that there was a seeing stone on the planet, one that they could use to lure the child and hopefully their other ally to them. If not, they could be in trouble, but the point is, they could bring the child to them. The two Jedi discreetly abandoned the temple. Thanks to the vision Yoda had, where he spent years living his life, he knew that nothing would protect his order. If he tried to evacuate them, it would only make their pain elongated. The terror would force them to share excruciating deaths. Instead, he and Anakin wouldn't fail. When they arrived at Aratera, Anakin noted how powerful the planet was, and Yoda just smiled. He immediately, though, got to the Seeing Stone and activated it, telling Skywalker to wait patiently and to meditate. If he could connect himself to this planet, then they could prepare to fight this creature of darkness. Yoda did note the importance of Anakin's connection to Aratera, because if he could truly connect, then it should be easier for him to protect himself. Yoda wasn't too concerned with his own life. He knew that sacrificing himself could end up being the key to victory here, something Yoda was content with. After hours of waiting and seeing no sign of the elusive figure, they assumed it had failed. Instead of being impatient, they spent their time focusing on the Force, meditating together and connecting their bond. Yoda and Anakin had always been pretty separated, standoffish even, when it came to a true, lasting connection. But here, and since Mortis, they were able to fully maintain their relationship. In doing this, they'd be able to work as one unit, without any real divides in their efforts. Yoda knew that he could give Anakin the best shot by trying to weaken their enemy, but not even Yoda knew what to expect from them. After forming a battle meditation around themselves, they would continue to deepen their souls in connection to the planet they sat on. All of this peace and tranquility would be disrupted once more. It had been thousands of years since Aratera saw conflict, and here it would come again. Out from the tree line, a masked individual ignited a blood-red lightsaber. Unlike the Sith, this was a darker red, almost maroon. What the Jedi didn't know is that the crystal the child held was an Atan crystal. Unlike a normal kyber crystal, the Atan could take energy from opposing energies and utilize it for itself. This was a crystal that would grow stronger the longer a duel or battle continued. Anakin and Yoda together ignited their sabers, preparing to fight the child without the help of Sidious. Fear of failure sat with them, but maybe they could do this. Anakin was the Chosen One after all, right? Without a second to size up their opponent, he lunged at them. The child's movements were almost robotic, but he was sick with a lightsaber. He swung it forward as the two Jedi protected themselves. The duel raged across the flat terrains outside the Seeing Stone, as the two light side users drew off the planet for assistance, but they feared that it would give them little aid. The child was almost unstoppable with the way he moved his saber. Abaloth prepared him with enough tidbits of information that he wouldn't be able to be stopped by an army of Jedi, but his powers were far beyond lightsaber combat. Their weapons continued to drag and tug at one another. Skywalker jabbed in, but landed no hit, before slipping backwards to avoid a slice at his neck and red electricity flooding towards him. The child drove his body at Anakin, overpowering him in raw strength, something Anakin hadn't truly experienced in his life. Yoda used his speed and agility, but the child continued bouncing off of Yoda's strikes and levying heavier attacks against Anakin, who could only defend himself. The Jedi tried using the Force in varying attempts against him, but the child thwarted them by either absorbing their power with his hands or allowing the Atan crystal to do the same thing. They continued pressing until a Force push cratered into the ground and launched them both from their feet. The child rushed Anakin, sensing him to be the Chosen One, with the most chance at ending his life. But Skywalker rolled off of his back, pulling his and Yoda's weapons into his hand at the last second. He raised the small green saber as a shoto and defended himself, as he cut the child's ankle, which did some deep damage, but the creature's skin overlapped itself, creating a bulging protective layer of skin. Anakin was clapped in the face and fell backwards. Yoda, with all of his strength, in the Force, grabbed the child before he could slice through Anakin's back. Anakin turned around and shoved his saber through the child's chest, but with the same result, the creature healed himself and grew more powerful. The Atan crystal slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave through it and dividing the surface ever so slightly. Anakin jumped and then rolled, throwing Yoda's saber back to him as he avoided another strike. He paced away from the child, gaining his breath before engaging again. Sabers continued to strike as both Jedi searched for a method to defeating this creature. He was unstoppable, and here did they both realize the importance of having a third, a user of darkness. Anakin attempted to use the power he used on the daughter and son on Mortis, but it proved to no avail. The creation of Abaloth shredded the attempts. Weapons clobbered again, Yoda and Anakin attempting to find some method to defeating this creature, until the Cortosis armor collided with Skywalker's saber, forcing him to drop the assault, and avoid another strike, before throwing his hands up to catch the child. They interlocked, using their physical strength against each other, and again, Skywalker was outmatched. His boots left indents in the surface, as the child headbutted him, leaving a bloody bruise on his forehead, before slashing his saber down on Anakin's hip, and throwing him to the side. Yoda tried to stop the child, but instead of being able to use the raw force against him, he was flung back at the Seeing Stone, unable to save Anakin. Skywalker's vision was blurry as he tried to find his lightsaber and rid his eyes of the blurriness by rubbing them. The child raised his weapons and swung down, the killing blow, but it was stopped with a burst of electricity coming from the tree line. Sidious used all of his strength and pushed the child backwards, before igniting his own 2 crimson sabers and swinging them at the stranger. It defended himself from Palpatine's rapid attack. Anakin tried to find his footing, but he was uneasy. He then spotted the 3 crimson sabers interlocked in a duel with each other. Sidious immediately felt that he couldn't overpower the individual, so he slid away, using his finesse to keep his opponent on edge, learning from his failure against the son on Mortis. Yoda would be the first to engage again, as Anakin looked like a lost kid without his parents, searching for his saber and holding his thumping head. The Avatar of Light and Dark used their combined skills to put the child on the back pedal. He was a remarkable strength, but unable to keep pace with 2 masters of every lightsaber form. This was something that impressed Sidious. He realized the power they had here together. Part of him wished that Yoda had been his instructor, because they would have been unstoppable, though the 2 masters noticed Anakin's absence. Yoda used the Force to leap off the ground, landing on Palpatine's shoulder and slashing down at the child, cutting the mask, but it didn't do damage. Instead, his saber was deignited, and Yoda was kicked in the stomach and thrown backwards, but Anakin caught him with the Force. Quickly, the Grand Master healed Anakin's head, returning his vision back to clarity, and they readied themselves. All at once, 3 incredibly talented duelists engaged the child, but he held them off with almost ease. There were moments where they had beat him, where they had cut him, where they had gotten him to a weak spot, but he was unstoppable. Every wound healed immediately, and the Atan crystal only got more powerful. Sidious, Yoda, and Anakin stepped away, sizing up their opponent as they caught their breath. The faceless mask made their opponent even more terrifying because he didn't even seem lightly fazed by the several minutes of engagement. Though the duel continued again, and right as it did, the child targeted Yoda, hoping to extinguish the alliance that clearly existed between he and Anakin, one not shared with the other individual, that being Palpatine. This targeting caught them all off guard. Yoda was blinded by the warping speed, and with a headbutt to both of Palpatine's sabers and the swing of the Cortosis forearm plate into Anakin's weapon, Yoda was without aid. The Atan crystal crushed through Yoda's saber, destroying the hilt, and forcing Yoda to use the Force to protect himself. He held the blood crystal just above his head, almost killing him, as Anakin and Palpatine realized in one moment what they had to do. They raised their hands and used the Force on the child, pulling him from all sides. Yoda, sensing the aid, poured all of his strength into it too. As if all 3 of them transcended reality, like father, daughter, and son, the most powerful beings in the Force currently alive shredded the child in all of his strength. They pulled at him, draining his abilities and pouring their own combined unity into his wounds. These bulges weren't permanent healers. They were meant to absorb any fear from the child, which they had, but they would only last as long as the mother saw fit. Her power, though, slowly started to seep out of these wounds as Anakin, Palpatine, and Yoda filled their own essences within them. The child fell to his knees and cried out in agony before slowly bubbling out and exploding into an array of fire. The soul of the mother, trapped within a poor individual, was released, and the only individual not knocked back by the explosion was Skywalker. He could feel the mother, and with all of his strength he reached out, pulling on the Force and opened a black hole within her very essence, absorbing her wholly and destroying everything she was. A little bit of her life within the Maul died instantaneously, ridding the galaxy of her threat. At this, Anakin fell almost lifelessly to the ground and wheezed painfully. Sidious and Yoda looked at him, before a completely defenseless Yoda looked back to Palpatine. The Dark Lord didn't even clock this, as he walked over towards Anakin and placed his icy cold hands on Anakin's chest, asking if he were alright. Yoda looked for a weapon to defend Anakin, but he couldn't find one. He, though, quickly got to Anakin's side. Without hesitating, Palpatine asked if they could heal him. Yoda nodded, and they slowly but surely poured pieces of themselves into Anakin so that he could return with full strength. His eyes opened, and they pulled Anakin out to a seated position, both putting their hands on either his shoulder or his lower back to see if he was alright. Nothing felt real, and the first thing Anakin noticed was the dying fires and the scorched earth surrounding them. The Virgins on Ara Terra was dead, consumed in the fight to kill the child, but a fight that was won. Anakin looked to Palpatine and realized that the Sith Lord was showing compassion. Then he looked to the Jedi Master, who showed true attachment to Anakin, and again, nothing felt real. Well, away from them, on Mortis, an equally as important fight had commenced. The daughter refused to fight the son, but she defended herself from his power. In an attempt to kill her with his bare hands, he jabbed the dagger of Mortis through his own heart by accident. He collapsed nearly instantly and died on the spot. It wasn't the intention of the daughter, because she didn't want it to happen, but she killed him by accident, and she regretted pulling the dagger because she believed that her brother would have let up. This wasn't true in the slightest, but it would burden her heart as she reigned over the Mortis realm for good. Back on Ara Terra, a surreal awkwardness hit the three survivors of the fight with the child. They all knew they had just killed Abaloth and saved the galaxy, but what now? Anakin knew what needed to be done because the war was terrible for the galaxy. If there was a threat like Abaloth, what if there were others out there? Instead of trying to fight the pull of the light and the dark, Anakin turned to both of them. He wanted to bring them together and end the war and potentially all wars. Yoda had no problem with this, and surprisingly, Sidious didn't either. Well, that makes things easy. Not exactly. See, Palpatine had truly felt fear in fighting the creation of darkness. In that fight, he realized he couldn't ever truly be the ultimate power in the galaxy. That was against the son, not even the child. He could only sustain a fraction of that control for a short period of time, and the legacy that he left wouldn't be worth his name, in his opinion at least. The reason he saw interest in this is because what he could do with the Jedi. Palpatine selfishly saw the glamour in training Jedi the dark side, rivaling Yoda as a youngling instructor, spreading his lessons of darkness to everyone inside the Jedi Order, bringing true change to the Jedi. Palpatine saw the value of himself in the context of the Jedi, not the actual benefit of unity. To him, this was the closest thing to having ultimate power, because Palpatine knew that absolutely no one outside the Jedi Order would respect or understand his gifts. The Jedi were a fully formed sect of Force users, talented enough to grasp his power and his talents. To him, this was greater than anything he could gain otherwise, because now having faced the child and seen Anakin's true potential, he understood more than ever that he didn't amount to anything comparatively. The Jedi were a little put off by the sudden change from Palpatine, but he would prove himself by calling the execution of Order 99 on the Confederacy. This would result in the near immediate deaths of Dooku, Grievous, and Admiral Trench. It would be a solid way to put an end to their little movement, and the droid armies would basically fall apart by turning on each other. On the trip from Ara Terra to Coruscant, Anakin and Palpatine, as well as Yoda and Palpatine, would have separate conversations about the choice the Dark Lord wanted to make. Sidious explained that he wanted to offer a new leg of instruction to the Jedi, one that could have a lasting legacy. Neither were stupid. They knew exactly what he wanted to call it. Something grotesque like Sheev's Academy for Special Jedi or Palpatine's Palace of Purpose. Actually, those are some pretty good name choices, but yeah, they caught him. He wanted to actually instruct, for his own legacy, for his own gain. For Palpatine, this wouldn't be easy. He would struggle the most out of the three, because the Jedi rejected vicious training regimens for their Padawans. So the former Sith would need to conform. but this also went hand in hand with Yoda's new gained trust for Anakin. It was a bit hard to explain to other Jedi, but due to the chaos surrounding the end of the war, no one would really care that much about this new trust or Palpatine joining them. It was a quick end of combat, and suddenly Palpatine was this morally gray Jedi. A little twist of events. The Jedi would eventually get a grip on it, and with Yoda's trust in Anakin, they would accept this palace of purpose for aspiring minds. It was actually quite wholesome because Anakin and Palpatine could work together, while instructing young Jedi who wanted to learn and understand their more balanced approach to the Force. The light was stronger than ever, thanks to the death of the Sun, but the Jedi had a lot of work to do. Palpatine would remain Chancellor, and he would oust all the greed from the Senate by publicly exposing them with all the information he knew so well because he was Sidious. It was a harsh reality for the villains of the galaxy, but with the clone armies and no droid army to protect themselves, they were forced to comply to the Supreme Chancellor. The legacy that the former Sith Lord sought would ironically be accomplished, giving him an everlasting high. He didn't fully conform to the Jedi way, because there were sprouts of evil that could never be erased, but he was able to be everything he wanted at once. He had ultimate power in the Force, not comparable to Skywalker, but enough for him. His legacy would last for generations as Chancellor, and potentially even longer as a Jedi instructor. It wasn't his first choice, but after facing the child, he was compelled to accept this as the best path for him in the galaxy. Yoda and Anakin would continue to build a relationship, it being the Grand Master that was the only Jedi to ever learn about the relationship Anakin had with Padme. The Order would never forego their attachment restrictions, just because those would take decades of institutional change, but they would move forward with a positive grace. Yoda would be the twins' godfather, and he would frequently bring the twins cannolis because that's what all good godfathers do. Luke and Leia wouldn't become Jedi inside the Order, but with the combined training of Yoda and Anakin, they would become some of the most adept Force sensitives in the entire galaxy. This, though, would be their greatest aid, as they went into their own selective careers to, like their parents, make a positive impact on the galaxy at wide. And that, my friends, is our story, and special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button, let's talk about this story. So, this is a little weird. The Mortis arc is kind of 50-50 for me, I have to be in the mood for it kind of thing, but I thought that having Anakin unite the Sith and the Jedi through a Mortis arc that included Palpatine and Yoda and Anakin on Mortis would be really interesting. So this is kind of like two what ifs in one. It's what if Anakin, Palpatine, and Yoda went to Mortis, and then what if he united the Jedi and the Sith. More or less, I think that Sidious, I think that's going to be the biggest draw here. I think Sidious in this scenario isn't doing what he did in that one Dooku video I did a while back, where he's like, oh, I've seen true evil, now I don't want it anymore. Kind of like Megatron Transformers Prime. This is more of him doing I realize there are greater powers than me. I realize that I can never truly have what I want. So I'm gonna find the best way to maintain my legacy. And doing that isn't with the Sith. That's more or less what I see him doing here. He's just establishing his legacy as a being, as an individual, because he can have that with the Sith rather than the Jedi. So that's more or less what I was going for with him. As for Yoda and Anakin, I love working on that dynamic. I thought that'd be fun. So having them have a closer relationship was a lot of fun. And then having the daughter accidentally kill the son. In this scenario, the son is literally just attacking her, and he stabs himself by pushing the blade through himself by attacking her. So it's kind of like a suicide. Yeah. So, hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.